We already have a nigger. We don't need any more nigger big shots.
I learned a lot, and I learned that and Corn Pop was a bad dude.
I think the two-party system is good for the South and good for the Negro, good for the black in the South. Other than the fact that they still call me boy, I think they've changed their mind a little bit.
What kind of a chance would a northeastern liberal like Joe Biden stand in the South?
Better than anybody else. And you don't know my state. My state was a slave state. My state is the 8th largest black population in the country. My state is anything from a northeast liberal state.
In Delaware, the largest growth in population is Indian Americans moving from India. You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. I'm not joking.
I'm a 29-year-old oddball. The only reason I was able to raise the money is I was able to have a national constituency to run for office. Because I was 29, I'm like the token black or the token woman. I was the token young person.
We're talking about this money that
That's not an announcement for office, by the way.
On the way back from Mumbai to go meet with President Xi in China, I stopped in Singapore to meet with a guy named Lee Kuan Yew, who most foreign policy experts around the world say is the wisest man in the Orient.
Well, in the case of legislation, both state and federal, the term Oriental is definitely out because of its connections to xenophobia and racism.
In terms of foreclosures, in terms of bad loans that were these Shylocks who took advantage of these women and men while overseas.
Not granting a federal charter to a organization made up of many fine people who continue to display the Confederate flag as a symbol, and the charter was to give them the right, the imperator of the federal government, to do that. It had nothing to do with the First Amendment, Judge.
Charles J. Schmedlap from ᔕTOTE. Stand up. There's one more band member that I want you to meet. Ladies and gentlemen, our vocalist tonight, Michael Jackson. Michael, would you please stand? Thank you. Thank you very much. Soon to become Prince, as I was just pointed out to me.
Haiti just quietly sunk into the Caribbean or rose up 300 feet. It wouldn't matter a whole lot. Is it because blacks are involved in Haiti?
It was old media that got him in trouble. Personal comments he made about another White House hopeful, Senator Barack Obama.
You got the first sort of mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean and a nice-looking guy. That's a storybook, man.
Yeah. He's going to let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains. We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community. I would love to see.
Take a look at my record, man. I have a record that is second to none. The NAACP has endorsed me every time I've run. Come on. Take a look at the record.
Come on, baby, let's investigate.
Joe has a terrible history in the black community, and everybody just loves him because he's the fluffy old guy.
Former Vice President Joe Biden, he's run for president twice before, unsuccessfully. He's never before been the frontrunner. Now that he is towering over all the other declared Democratic candidates, his almost 5 decades in public life are getting some real scrutiny. On top of that list, his record on civil rights during his younger days as a U.S. Senator. CNN's Jeff Zeleny has exclusively obtained some letters written by Biden himself.
Joe Biden is coming back as a solo act.
I'm ready to go.
With his long record facing a new look under the spotlight of the 2020 campaign.
Gentlemen and ladies of the Senate.
One chapter receiving fresh scrutiny comes from his earliest years in the Senate, when he strongly opposed mandatory school busing. was designed to achieve integration and a more equitable education. What's less known is how he followed the lead of some of the Senate's most fervent segregationists. In a series of never-before-published letters reviewed by CNN, the strength of Biden's opposition to busing comes into sharper focus. On March 25, 1977, Biden wrote, "My bill strikes at the heart of the injustice of court-ordered busing. It prohibits the federal courts from disrupting our educational system." Biden sought and received support from Mississippi Senator James Eastland, the Democratic chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and a leading symbol of Southern resistance to desegregation. He frequently spoke of blacks as, quote, an inferior race. Eastland and others were partners on several of Biden's anti-busing bills. On June 30th, 1977, Biden wrote, "Dear Mr. Chairman, I want you to know that I very much appreciate your help during this week's committee meeting in attempting to bring my anti-busing legislation to a vote." Then in 1978, Biden again asked Eastland to put his anti-busing bill before the full Senate, writing, "Your participation in floor debate would be welcome." Ronnie Dunn is a professor at Cleveland State University who co-wrote the book Boycotts, Busing, and Beyond.
Those letters I find somewhat surprising given Senator Biden's or Vice President Biden's current position and potential candidacy for the presidency and his position as a liberal. Those are issues that he's obviously going to have to answer for.
You said surprising. Surprising in what way?
Well, the fact that he would solicit the support of staunch segregationists, James Eastland as well as Jesse Helms, introducing legislation as opposing busing at that time.
Now to the race for 2020 this morning and new backlash against former Vice President Joe Biden. He's refusing to apologize as he faces growing criticism over comments he made about being able to work with others in Washington. But his examples were segregationist senators 40 years ago.
Apologize for what?
Refusing to apologize for touting his ability to find common ground with senators he disagreed with, even segregationists. Biden is facing sharp criticism. At a fundraiser Tuesday, Biden describing Senator Herman Talmadge of Georgia as one of the meanest guys I ever knew, but adding, well, guess what? At least there was some civility. We got things done. And recalling Senator James Eastland of Mississippi, Biden said, he never called me boy. He always called me son. Biden's 2020 rival, Senator Cory Booker, demanding an apology.
Somebody running for president of the United States, somebody running to be the leader of our party, should know that using the word boy in the way he did can cause hurt and pain. Vice President Biden shouldn't need this lesson.
Now, Biden actually took it a step further, saying that it was Senator Cory Booker who owes him the apology.
Cory should apologize.
I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
To coddle the reputations of segregationists, of people who, if they had their way, I would literally not be standing here as a member of the United States Senate, is, I think, it's misinformed and it's wrong.
But Biden is not backing down.
Apologize for what?
I like the idea they keep in jail longer. I'm the guy that wrote the bill requiring federal judges to keep people in jail 100% of the time for which they're sentenced. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street. increase the penalties. Increase them. I would put the son of a gun in jail. Put them to death.
From the crack epidemic of the 80s to the crime wave of the 90s to the post-9/11 war on terror, throughout his career, Biden has represented the Democratic Party consensus, shifting his views to fit whatever best serves his own political career. Over his 44 years in the Senate and then as vice president, Biden was a leading architect of today's criminal justice system, which contributed to mass incarceration and the police misconduct that protesters are fighting back against today.
Biden crime bill, the Biden crime bill. The Biden crime bill. Hell, we've had crime bills coming out our ears. Every major crime bill since 1976, every minor crime bill has had the name of the Democratic senator from the state of Delaware, Joe Biden. You got a gun, you commit a felony, 10 years. We already have it 5 years. Minimum mandatory. Judge can't say, you know, you had it in your pocket, you never intended to use it, we're only going to give you 1 year. Judge has to say 5 years. Well, he wants to make it 10 or 20 or 60. We can work that out.
He wanted to remove judicial discretion for those who, quote, don't meet the middle-class criteria of susceptibility to rehabilitation.
They are beyond the pale, many of those people. They literally have not been socialized. They are in jail. Away from my mother, your husband, our families.
The Biden-Thurmond Violent Crime Control Act of 1991 would have increased the maximum sentence for 44 crimes to include the death penalty.
A wag in the newspaper recently wrote, Biden has made it a death penalty offense for everything but jaywalking. I'm going to make it for 46 crimes. Biden says make it for 51. We're going to get tough.
Then he presented the final version of the legislation.
60 new death penalties, brand new, 60. There are 70 additional enhancements of penalties, i.e., you go to jail longer.
After his disastrous 1987 presidential campaign, Biden had staged his political comeback, in part by becoming a media darling on issues of policing and crime, and he led the fight to pass the landmark 1994 crime bill under Bill Clinton.
When I wrote the original bill that started this whole process, the so-called Biden crime bill, I didn't call a liberal confab and write it. I didn't call any big society people and write it. I called the cops. A Democratic president wants 100,000 cops. A Democratic president wants to build 125,000 new prison cells. That's the secret. That somehow the Republicans tried to make the crime bill tougher. I say poppycock. They didn't make anything tougher. Found out that this midnight basketball isn't getting them together, a bunch of jive folks who live in their city to do, try to see if they can be Michael Jordan. When they found out, they were keeping schools open. So gangs come off streets instead of out raping my mother, marauding me, robbing the local store. They're in a gymnasium. And my daughter will be safer. My wife will be safer. My mother will be safer. And I will be safer. And I will be happy.
Never again should Washington put politics and party above law and order.
Along with several laws passed in the 80s, the 1994 crime bill drove up the local, state, and federal prison populations, and it tarnished the reputations of Biden and Bill Clinton, who signed it into law.
Hey, Clinton, you! Did you want to take pictures of my people here? We're still in jail for what you did!
When Biden ran for president in 2008, he told the New York Times that he knew more people would be locked up across the board.
You ashamed of that bill?
Not at all. And the fact I drafted the bill. We had enormous success.
The mass incarceration created by Biden's lock-em-up policies ripped apart vulnerable communities and families for a generation, and the federal funding streams and law enforcement infrastructure it created continue to hinder reform efforts.
I'll do my job and I will take responsibility.
You ashamed of that bill?
Not at all.
Democrats want to see me locked in jail.
I just have one thing to say. Hang on here.
All right.
You. First of all, I want to congratulate you. The cover of, well, I tell you, that's pretty good. That's pretty big time. Number one, doesn't surprise me. You're on the cover. But number two, thanks for your generosity. It's time for some courage, and you're exercising it. You and other people of your stature who have millions of people who look to you. You're exercising courage. It's not easy for you to do this. You're going to get a lot of flack for the kinds of things you say, but you have the courage to stand up and say, now's the time. We really rely on people like you. The reason I'm so optimistic is because of your generation. You're the smartest, the best educated, the least prejudiced, and the most engaged generation in American history. And you're going to change things.
And this claim about Somali immigrants in his hometown of Wilmington, Delaware.
It's a large, very identifiable Somali community. There's an awful lot who are driving cabs and are friends of mine, for real. I'm not being solicitous. I'm being serious.
And it turns out factually incorrect. Only 15 Somalis live in the entire state, according to the Census Bureau. And Wilmington cab drivers told CNN they knew of no Somalis driving taxis.
Nope. Vice President Joe Biden is facing backlash for his comments about the black community. Presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden is clarifying his Thursday comments when he seemed to suggest the black community lacks diversity of thought.
What you all know, but most people don't know, unlike the African-American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community with incredibly different attitudes about different things.
Overnight, Biden said that he in no way meant to suggest the African-American community is a monolith. Not by identity, not on issues, not at all. Adding that he was referring to diversity of attitudes among Latinos when it comes to immigration. It's the second time since May that Biden is apologizing for a comment about race.
The way that he talks about race, at the very least, is problematic. And there's a lot of folks of color who listen to the way that this man speaks and say, this isn't someone who has really evolved with the times.
Eye-opening lead in a New York Times profile of Joe Biden's 1988 presidential campaign, the first time he ran for president. He lied to voters, according to the New York Times, quoting aides of Biden's, about having marched in the civil rights movement. This is Biden making this false claim in 1987.
When I marched in the civil rights movement, I did not march with a 12-point program. I marched with tens of thousands of others to change attitudes.
And the New York Times reports, quote, more than once, advisors had gently reminded Mr. Biden of the problem with this formulation. He had not actually marched during the civil rights movement, and more than once, Mr. Biden assured them that he understood, kept telling the story anyway. That is really, really weird.
When I was 17 years old, like many of you, I participated in sit-ins to desegregate the restaurants and movie houses of Wilmington, Delaware. I came out of the civil rights movement. I was one of those guys that sat in and marched and all that stuff. During the 60s, I was, in fact, very concerned about the civil rights movement. I was not an activist. I worked at an all-black swimming pool in the east side of Wilmington, Delaware. I was involved in what they were thinking, what they were feeling. I was involved, but I was not out marching. I was not down in Selma. I was not anywhere else. I was a suburbanite kid who got a dose of exposure to what was happening to black Americans when I'm in my own city.
Now, his aides went back to say, look, he was in office marching for the idea of civil rights, but was not actually marching in the streets. But that would not fly as much that he was supporting civil rights. But I'm saying that in today's
that's not the word marching
of Twitter, okay.
I know, you're just telling what they said.
Right,
but
but in the age of Twitter today, Instagram, there would be pictures of him not marching. So you cannot get away with that in this moment. So that's his big challenge.
Yeah.
Can he modernize himself, and has he sort of brushed away all those old tendencies he had?
You know, when I was a teenager in Delaware, for real, I got involved in the civil rights movement. We have the 8th largest black population in America. Most people don't know that. And I'd go to 8 o'clock Mass, then I'd go to Reverend Herring's church where we'd meet in order to organize and figure where we were going to go, whether we were going to desegregate the ᗪᗷᗕ movie theater or what we were going to do. I got my education for real in the black church. And that's not hyperbole, it's a fact. We choose truth over facts. I ran for the United States Senate as a 29-year-old kid for two reasons. I ran for the United States Senate because I came out of the civil rights movement. I was no great shake. I was just a kid in a segregated state that thought it was wrong and got engaged when I was in high school. And there wasn't anything heroic about what I did. Sit-ins and desegregating restaurants. No, you haven't. You're a lying dog-faced pony soldier. But I got my education, Reverend Doc, in the black church. Not a joke. Because when we used to get organized on Sundays to go out and desegregate movie theaters and things like that, we do it through the black church. I was no big shakes, Reverend, in the civil rights movement. I was just a kid. I got involved in desegregating movie theaters and helping, you may remember Reverend Moyer in Delaware and Herman Holloway organize voter registration drives, coming out of black churches on Sundays, figuring how we were going to move. In October, I was invited to the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis to receive the Freedom Award, a thing when I sat in black churches on the east side of Wilmington getting ready to, and by the way, next to two Jewish rabbis, getting ready to go out and desegregate movie theaters in Delaware. I never, ever thought in my life I would be worthy of, and I'm still not sure I'm worthy of it.
But being friendly and being a friend, I think, are two different things.
Errol Barnett is a national correspondent for CBS News and interviewed Biden for the National Association of Black Journalists virtual convention.
Mr. Vice President, your opponent in this election, President Trump, has made your mental state a campaign topic. And when asked in June if you'd been tested for cognitive decline, you've responded that you're constantly tested in effect because you're in situations like this on the campaign trail. But please clarify specifically, have you taken a cognitive test?
No, I haven't taken a test. Why the hell would I take a test? Come on, man. That's like saying you, before you got in this program, if you take a test where you're taking cocaine or not, what do you think, huh? Are you a junkie?
What do you say to President Trump, who brags about his test and makes your mental state an issue for voters?
Well, if he can't figure out the difference between an elephant and a lion, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. Did you watch that? Look, come on, man. I know you're trying to goad me, but I mean, I'm so forward-looking to have an opportunity to sit with the president or stand with the president in debates. There are going to be plenty of time. And by the way, as I joke with him, you know, I shouldn't say it. I'm going to say something I probably shouldn't say. Anyway, I am very willing to let the American public judge my physical and mental my physical as well as my mental fitness, and to make a judgment about who I am.
Now, we asked the Biden campaign this morning if they wanted to add any additional context to those remarks, specifically comparing a mental test to being tested for cocaine. The campaign has not yet responded.
I got started out with HBCU, Delaware State. Now, I don't want to hear anything negative about Delaware State here, okay?
But here's the thing, I don't know if Biden should be attacking Bernie for exaggerating his friendship with Obama, especially since Biden has to answer for some exaggerations of his own.
Joe Biden has recently been telling voters that he was once arrested trying to see Nelson Mandela in South Africa in the 1970s when he was already a sitting U.S. Senator.
This day, 30 years ago, Nelson Mandela walked out of prison and entered into discussions about apartheid. I had the great honor of meeting him. I had the great honor of being arrested with our UN ambassador on the streets of Soweto trying to get to see him on Robbins Island. I came back from South Africa trying to see Nelson Mandela and getting arrested for trying to see him on Robben Island. He was in prison.
But tonight, the New York Times reviewed all available records and can't find any evidence of that arrest actually happening.
Man, this is not a good look for Biden. Because remember, first, he falsely claimed he marched in the civil rights movement. Now he's making up a story about getting arrested in apartheid South Africa. It's weird. The guy's trying so hard to impress black voters. Now, although Biden keeps telling this apartheid story, nobody else on the trip remembers getting arrested. And there's no proof of it ever happening. And I'll be honest, as a South African, I'm personally offended by this. Because Nelson Mandela hated it when people used his name to make themselves seem more important.
He made the most remarkable man I ever met in my whole career. And we spent several days in South Africa. And after he got elected president, he came by to see me because I was on the Foreign Relations Committee. He thanked me, along with I assume everyone else that had gone on that trip, for supporting sanctions against apartheid.
When I was a teenager in Delaware,
you guys gotta see this.
Hey, they saying you that MAGA boy. Call me what you want, cause that don't matter, boy. I just speak the truth, that's something they don't understand. Why these white liberals trying to tell me who I am? Don't put me in groups, cause I'm my own man. I said I wasn't Democrat and lost a few friends. Radio stopped playing me, I lost a few fans. But tell me I'm a victim, cause the power in my hands. I am not a victim, I am not oppressed. They keep taking shots, so I might just buy a vest. They said no with my MAGA hat, I told them say less. I bought the biggest MAGA hat, I did it just to flex. Wear it every day just to make them boys upset. I can't be...
The longest-serving senator in U.S. history has died. Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia was in and out of the hospital during his final years of serving in Congress. During his long career as president pro tempore, he was third in line to the presidency and served as the high-ranking chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. Byrd's record is marked with controversy, though. In the 1940s, Byrd was an active member of the Ku Klux Klan. Many of his early political views strongly opposed civil rights. Byrd personally filibustered a civil rights bill for 14 hours.
The 1964 Civil Rights Bill was the most significant piece of legislation in 20th century U.S. history.
The Civic Rights Bill was passed on July 2, 1964 by Lyndon Baines Johnson. The main 3 points of the bill are: Number 1, the bill is going to officially outlaw discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex or national origin. Number 2, the bill is going to ban the practice of unequal application of voter registration laws. Many of the Democratic Southern states were manipulating voter registration laws to make sure that African Americans weren't allowed to register to vote. And number 3, the bill will ensure the banning of racial segregation. Number 1 in our schools, number 2 in the workplace, and number 3 in places of public accommodation.
Would you change your vote on civil rights if you had to give it today?
yes, I would. On the civil rights laws of 1964, I would change my vote.
Why?
One, I lost a grandson in 1982. Anyhow, it came to my mind at that time how I loved this grandson. And it also came to my mind that black people love their grandsons too. And
the more I thought about it, I thought, well, now suppose I were black, and my grandson and I were out on the highways in the wee hours of the morning or midnight, and I stopped at a place to get that little grandson a glass of water or to have it go to the restroom, and there's a sign, whites only. Black people love their grandsons as much as I love mine, and that's just not right. That is what made me come to the conclusion that if I had it to do over again, I'd vote against that.
Race relations.
I think this is my personal opinion, I think we talk about race too much. I just think we talk so much about it that we helped, I think, create somewhat of an illusion. I think we try to have goodwill. My old mom told me, Robert, you can't go to heaven if you hate anybody. We practice that. There are white. I've seen a lot of white in my time. I'm going to use that word, but we just need to work together to make our country better. And I just soon quit talking about it so much.
Now, after our conversation Friday, I went back to visit with Senator Byrd, and he said there is a term I used in our discussion of race relations that people may misconstrue.
The next person that I have the honor to present is a man who has served with our beloved Senator Byrd for 36 years in the Senate, almost longer than any other senator. Would you please join me in giving a West Virginia welcome to the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden.
He was fiercely devoted, as you've all heard, to his principles. Even once he became power, Robert C. Byrd elevated the Senate. For the Senate chamber was Robert C. Byrd's cathedral. The point is that this is a man who knew exactly what he was doing. And he was the institution itself. I never called Senator Byrd senator. I always called him leader. I did not praise racist. So I made a promise that no matter where I was, if he called me and said he needed my vote, I'd drop whatever I was doing and I'd come. And I kept the commitment. For a lot of us, he was a friend, and he was a mentor, and he was a guide.
My friend and mentor, Robert C. Byrd. Senator Byrd was a man of surpassing eloquence and nobility.
There are white.
He was a Senate icon, he was a party leader, and he was my friend.
And accompanied by the Ku Klux Klan.
Long day, a lot of walking.
That's right, everybody. Don't tell me what we have to.
Vice President Joe Biden is trying to clear up some past issues. Last night, he brought up his role in a controversial Senate confirmation hearing from 28 years ago.
Joe Biden, of course, ran those hearings. He was chair of the Democratic-controlled Judiciary Committee in 1991 when Hill accused Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas of sexual harassment.
Clarence Thomas got to testify before Anita Hill and after Anita Hill. Well, that's not fair.
Right.
And at the time, the Judiciary Committee was made up of 14 all-white, all-male senators. Okay, there was 3 corroborating witnesses for Anita Hill, and Joe Biden, who is the chair, who gets to make those decisions, did not allow them to testify. Nah, that's bad. That's really bad.
Welcome, Professor Hill. Thank you. I had indicated to you that the committee
be more precise, me, it's not something that you initiated. Is that correct? Do you consider yourself part of some organized effort to determine whether or not Clarence Thomas should or should not sit on the bench? One of the things that has been indicated here is this notion of maybe that the witness, Professor Hill, really was basically the woman scorned, that she really had this romantic interest in Clarence Thomas, and that she was spurned, and after being spurned, she took up the role in the way that Shakespeare used the phrase, "Hell hath no fury." In answering very direct questions by Senator Specter, very fair but direct questions. Professor Hill, and call Judge Thomas. Are there any other incidences that occurred in his office in his office period?
There is, I recall at least one instance in his office at the EEOC where he discussed some pornographic material, or he brought up the substance or the content of pornographic material.
Again, it's difficult, but for the record, what substance did he bring up in this instance at EEOC in his office? What was the content of what he said?
Well, this was a reference to an individual who had a very large penis, and he used the name that he had been referred to in the pornographic material.
Do you recall what it was?
Yes, I do. The name that was referred to was Long Dong Silver.
You anticipated?
This? No, not at all. Not in my, I would have never even dreamed this up. I just can't imagine.
Is it reasonable to say that it was your hope and expectation that it would not come to this?
It was exactly what I was trying to, really very difficult, I made great effort to make sure that it did not come to this.
But I, for one, can assure you that, assuming for the moment what you have said is true, there is nothing hard to understand. Having spent as many years as I have dealing with the issue of victimization of women,
Wish I could have done more to prevent those questions the way they asked them. I hope my colleagues learned from that. My biggest regret was I didn't know how I could shut you off if you were a senator and you were attacking Nita Hill's character. Under the Senate rules, I can't gavel you down and say you can't ask that question, although I tried. And so what happened was she got victimized again during the process.
It seems like you get it now versus back in 91.
Well, I think I got it in 91.
Good to see you, Joe.
Please go on. I'm not sure. I know I don't know the dilemma, and I don't want it repeated. Did you all settle it? We all square? Okay, speak.
Please. Lying about it actually makes it much, much worse. And so he doesn't get to feel like the hero when he's looking back in history because he wasn't there. He didn't have the foresight. He wasn't progressive enough to know that he should have been on the right sides of those issues. But now he gets to, because he's lying and making up stories, he gets to get the political gains and capital and gets to feel in his heart like he's some sort of moral person when he wasn't actually in those fights. So the debate moderators should feel ashamed that they didn't ask him about this because it's extremely relevant to his record.
Proud of my record.
Okay.
Everybody's talking about how terrible I am on these issues. Barack Obama knew exactly who I was. He had
10 lawyers do a background check on everything about me on civil rights and civil liberties, and he chose me, and he said it was the best decision he made.
Honesty and humility, empathy and grace. And that's why I'm so proud to endorse Joe Biden for President of the United States.
The liberal is more deceitful, more hypocritical than the conservative. Both want power, but the white liberal is the one who has perfected the art of posing as the Negro's friend and benefactor. And by winning the friendship and support of the Negro, the white liberal is able to use the Negro as a pawn or a weapon in this political football game that is constantly raging between the white liberals and the white conservatives. The American Negro is nothing but a political football, and the white liberals control this ball through tricks or tokenism, false promises of integration and civil rights.
Just because a person is a Negro or a black American does not mean that he's going to struggle for Negro rights or for jobs for Negroes or anything else. I think that today you could point to a large number of Negro leaders who have consistently betrayed Negroes in a whole host of areas.
They aren't really Negro leaders. These are puppets that have been put in front of the Negro community by white liberals. These are parrots that have been put in front of the Negro community by white liberals. You can't name me a Negro leader who has betrayed Negroes, who has not been endorsed, sanctioned, subsidized, and supported by the white liberals.
Choosing Joe to be my vice president was one of the best decisions I ever made.